Hello everyone, John AG here. Welcome back to my channel, Aurex. If you haven't yet, subscribe to my channel. In this channel, you will find the real information, real market updates that everyone cannot tell you. So please subscribe this channel and love you all of my subscribers for your support. And please watch this video till the very end because YouTube will not push my videos to more people and add many things related to this topic and make this speech fully professional, emotional, human touch, and powerful. Look at the calendar. It is May 10th, 2026. The world as you once knew it, the financial security you once took for granted, has irrevocably changed. Over the past few relentless months, we have watched the Middle East ignite into a theater of unprecedented kinetic conflict. We have watched the skies over Tehran, Tel Aviv, and the vital shipping lanes of the Persian Gulf fill with the terrifying, calculated geometry of modern, high-tech warfare. The United States and its most critical allies are now locked in a complex, escalating, and incredibly dangerous military engagement. And if you turn on the mainstream news networks right now, they are entirely obsessed with the visual spectacle of this war. They are giving you the missile counts, the drone strike coordinates, the naval deployments maneuvering in the Red Sea. They are showing you the fire. But listen to me very carefully. They are entirely missing the engine that is keeping that fire burning. The real war, the conflict that is going to fundamentally alter the trajectory of your life, the purchasing power of your life savings, and the future of your children, is not being fought with conventional weapons. It is not being fought with aircraft carriers or hypersonic gliders. It is being fought with ledgers. It is being fought with shadow fleets, precursor chemicals, front companies, and a quiet, systematic, ruthless dismantling of the United States dollar. Today, we are going to expose the phantom ledger. We are going to rip the veil off exactly what Beijing is actively hiding about the true, staggering cost of the Iran war. Because right now, China is playing a game of geopolitical chess so advanced, so utterly devoid of Western moral sentiment, and so brilliant in its financial execution that Washington is paralyzed. We are witnessing the beginning of a fractured global economy, the forceful birth of the Petroyuan, and the very real, terrifying mathematical indicators that the collapse of the dollar's absolute global hegemony has finally begun. Let me ask you a question that the financial press refuses to ask. How does a sanctioned, isolated nation fund a multi-front, multi-billion-dollar war? If you listen to the official, highly polished statements coming out of Beijing right now, you will hear the soothing language of diplomacy. You will hear calls for immediate de-escalation. You will hear President Xi Jinping speaking eloquently at international forums about, quote, common, comprehensive, and sustainable security architectures. They present themselves to the United Nations and the global public as the adults in the room, the neutral arbiters of peace who just want global stability. Do not let the diplomatic theater fool you for a single second. Neutrality in 2026 is an absolute illusion. While the West focuses on heavy-handed economic sanctions, asset freezes, and naval blockades, China has thrown an absolute, unbreakable financial lifeline to Iran's embattled regime. Let's look at the raw, unforgiving data. As we sit here today, China is purchasing roughly 95% of Iran's total oil exports. Think about the sheer, mind-bending magnitude of that number. Under the crushing, suffocating weight of Western sanctions, Iran should theoretically be bankrupt. A nation fighting a multi-front proxy in direct conflict requires billions of dollars every single month just to keep the lights on, let alone keep a massive military apparatus operational and striking precision targets. Where is that mountain of capital coming from? It is flowing directly, quietly, and continuously from the East. Because Iran is considered a pariah state in the eyes of Western financial institutions, they are forced to sell their crude oil at a massive, unprecedented discount. Beijing is saving upwards of $4 billion annually by buying this distressed, geopolitically toxic asset. But it is exactly how this oil is moved that reveals the true, chilling story of the modern shadow economy. If you think this oil is traveling on properly tracked, registered supertankers, clearing standard customs in international ports, you are living in the past. This is the domain of the Dark Fleet. Right now, as I speak these words, across the maritime straits of Southeast Asia, specifically near the remote coasts of Indonesia and Malaysia, ghost ships are moving in the dead of night. These are aging, rusting vessels that have deliberately deactivated their automatic identification systems, or AIS, transponders. They vanish entirely from global maritime tracking screens. They meet in open, highly treacherous waters to conduct massive, incredibly dangerous ship-to-ship transfers of millions of barrels of Iranian crude. The oil is pumped from one anonymous vessel to another, blending it, obscuring its origin, and laundering its identity. From there, the newly originless oil is shipped quietly to China's teapot refineries. These are the smaller, independent, highly lucrative refineries clustered in provinces like Shandong. Why is this detail critical? Because these teapot refineries have absolutely zero exposure to the United States financial system. They do not borrow in dollars, they do not bank in New York, and therefore they do not care even slightly about U.S. Treasury sanctions. You cannot sanction an entity that does not exist within your financial universe. Nearly half of Iran's total oil revenue is allocated directly to funding its armed forces, the IRGC, and its vast network of regional proxies. By keeping this illicit maritime pipeline wide open and completely unchecked, China is literally underwriting the resistance against American and Israeli forces. They are the silent, untouchable bankroller of a war they publicly claim to abhor. But the ghost oil is just the tip of the spear. The subterranean trade network goes much, much deeper than energy. It bleeds into the very hardware of modern conflict. Consider the munitions. The precision-guided missiles and loitering munitions that have been striking Allied assets and commercial shipping in the region do not magically materialize from the desert sand. They require highly specific, highly volatile chemical compounds and advanced microelectronics to function. In the early months of this escalating conflict, deep intelligence began leaking that China was turning a blind eye to the shipment of dual-use chemicals, specifically sodium perchlorate, to Iranian ports. For those who aren't military aerospace engineers, sodium perchlorate is the absolute foundational ingredient for solid rocket fuel. You cannot maintain a sustained, high-volume ballistic missile barrage without massive quantities of it. The U.S. Treasury Department eventually caught wind of this and sanctioned entities like Shenzhen Amor Logistics and its entire shadowy network of front companies for providing these exact precursors. Did those sanctions stop the flow? Absolutely not. The shipments simply mutated. They went deeper underground, routing through shell companies in Macau, Hong Kong, and the United Arab Emirates. Furthermore, the targeting intelligence guiding these strikes isn't just coming from ground-level radar or outdated domestic tech. Credible reports have surfaced that Chinese-based commercial satellite providers are allegedly providing high-definition, real-time imagery of U.S. and allied assets to Iranian forces. This is the genius of their strategy. China is not deploying a single uniform troop. They are not firing a single shot in anger. They are doing something far more effective and far more insidious. They are utilizing the plausible deniability of their massive commercial sector to tacitly direct the escalation dynamics of a major war. But here is the trillion-dollar hook, the question that should keep every Western central banker awake at night. How do you actually pay for billions of dollars in ghost oil, advanced rocket fuel precursors, and high-res satellite data when you are entirely cut off from SWIFT? How do you move that kind of massive capital without setting off glaring red alarms in the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Treasury Department? The answer is the most dangerous secret of the 21st century. They have engineered an entirely parallel financial universe. For decades, the United States has used the almighty dollar not just as a medium of exchange, but as a weapon of mass economic destruction. If a nation crossed Washington, they were simply expelled from the dollar-based system. You couldn't clear a cross-border transaction, you couldn't buy essential medicines or goods, your inflation skyrocketed, and your economy suffocated. It was the ultimate leverage. But history teaches us a brutal lesson. When you use an unassailable weapon too frequently, your enemies will eventually collaborate to build an impenetrable shield. Enter the CIPS network. China has spent the last 10 years meticulously, quietly building the cross-border interbank payment system as a direct functional rival to the Western-controlled SWIFT network. For a long time, Western financial analysts and arrogant Wall Street insiders laughed at it. They called it clunky, illiquid, heavily monitored by the CCP, and ultimately irrelevant. Nobody is laughing today in May 2026. Since the outbreak of the current Middle East conflict and the extreme weaponization of Western sanctions, the daily transaction value on the CIPS network has absolutely exploded. We are talking about surging from $85 billion a day to well over $130 billion a day in cleared, untraceable capital. Small to medium-sized Chinese banks, institutions that act as massive financial laundries, are taking the renminbi proceeds from that ghost fleet oil and converting it into immediate credit for Iran to buy the technology and fuel they need to sustain the war effort. There is zero US dollar involvement in these transactions. The Federal Reserve cannot see it. The US Treasury cannot freeze it. We are witnessing the highly successful, large-scale deployment of a closed-loop financial system that is completely immune to Western hegemony. And this brings us to the absolute core of the crisis. We are watching the death of a 50-year-old monopoly unfold in real time. To understand the sheer, terrifying gravity of what is happening to your money today, we must take a brief, critical walk through history. In 1974, coming off the painful abandonment of the gold standard and reeling from a crippling oil crisis, the United States struck a brilliant, world-defining deal with Saudi Arabia. The concept was simple, but incredibly powerful. The U.S. would provide guaranteed military protection and hardware to the kingdom. In exchange, Saudi Arabia agreed to price all of its global oil sales exclusively in U.S. dollars, and crucially, they would take their excess massive profits and reinvest them directly into U.S. Treasury bonds. This was the birth of the Petrodollar. It was the greatest financial coup in modern history. It created an artificial, permanent, and insatiable global demand for the U.S. dollar. If you were an emerging market, if you were Japan, Germany, or Brazil, and you wanted to keep your factories running and your cities lit, you needed oil. To get that oil, you needed dollars. To get those dollars, you had to export goods to the U.S. or borrow them. This genius system is exactly what allowed the United States government to run massive, multi-trillion-dollar deficits for decades without suffering the immediate hyperinflation that destroys normal countries. The rest of the world was forced to absorb our printed money because they desperately needed it for energy. Fast forward to June 2024. The 50-year anniversary of that foundational agreement arrived, and Saudi Arabia, quietly, deliberately, and with immense geopolitical calculation, let it expire without a renewal. They looked at what the West did to Russia in 2022, freezing hundreds of billions in sovereign reserves with the stroke of a pen, and the Saudis realized that holding all their national wealth in a currency controlled by a fickle Washington was a massive, unacceptable national security risk. Saudi Arabia officially joined the BRICS coalition. They began directing their unimaginable wealth not into U.S. debt, but into global equities, advanced domestic technology projects, and thousands of tons of physical gold. The recycling loop of the petrodollar began to fracture. Now, bring yourself back to the harsh reality of today, May 2026. That fracture has become a gaping chasm. Because of the war, the Strait of Hormuz, the most critical, sensitive oil choke point on planet Earth, is under constant existential threat. But Iran isn't just using the strait for kinetic military leverage. They have introduced something global markets have never seen before, a tactic we call currency coercion. We are seeing verified reports from maritime intelligence that to ensure safe transit or to facilitate massive gray market trades in these highly contested waters, payments and transit tolls are now being demanded in Chinese renminbi. This is a monumental, earth-shattering paradigm shift. The Petroyuan isn't just a theoretical white paper idea anymore. It is being forged right now in the fires of conflict. In the past, China tried to promote its currency through polite bilateral trade agreements and slow infrastructure loans. It was too slow. Now, the transition away from the dollar is being forced at gunpoint, driven by physical, military control over energy flows. I want to be perfectly, undeniably clear with you. The US dollar is not going to vanish tomorrow. You will still use it to buy your groceries, pay your mortgage, and fund your daily life. But the golden era of the dollar being a global monopoly, an unquestioned, unchallenged financial god, is dead. We are moving violently and rapidly into a fragmented, multipolar monetary order. We are entering a world where the global south, the rapidly expanding BRICS nations, and the axis of sanctioned states operate in a massive, parallel financial universe that does not need, want, or respect American monetary policy. And that brings us to the immediate, devastating, and highly personal consequences for the American economy and the Western financial system at large. Just weeks ago, the International Monetary Fund released its April 2026 World Economic Outlook. The language hidden deep in those sterile, bureaucratic reports should send absolute shivers down the spine of every single investor, every retiree relying on a pension, and every working citizen trying to build wealth. The IMF explicitly warned that the global economy is facing an unprecedented structural test. We are seeing global growth projections plummeting. We are seeing inflation, the terrifying beast that central bankers arrogantly told us was completely tamed back in 2024, rearing its ugly, destructive head once again. This new wave of inflation is not driven by stimulus checks. It is driven by skyrocketing global energy prices, deeply fractured supply chains, and the absolute reality of wartime economics. But here is the truly catastrophic part, the math equation that ends in ruin. The IMF noted that in a typical wartime boom, a nation's defense outlays increase dramatically, mostly financed through massive deficit spending. The United States is currently ramping up its military-industrial complex to support its allies, secure its own assets, and project power. But they are doing this while the national debt is already sitting at astronomical, incomprehensible, and historically fatal highs. In the past, when the U.S. needed to print money to fund a war, the petrodollar system ensured that foreign nations would gladly buy our debt. Saudi Arabia would buy it to recycle their oil profits. China would buy it to suppress their currency and boost exports. Japan would buy it for yield. I want you to look closely at the macroeconomic landscape right now and ask yourself, who is buying the debt today? Saudi Arabia is buying tech stocks and gold. China is actively, aggressively dumping U.S. treasuries and hoarding physical gold at a pace never seen in modern economic history. Japan is fighting its own demographic and currency collapse. The massive foreign buyers, the safety net of the American empire, are gone. So what happens when the U.S. government inevitably needs to borrow trillions of new dollars to fund this proxy war, but the rest of the world flat out refuses to buy the bonds? The bond yields spike violently. And that is exactly what the IMF warned about when they cited greater rollover risks in core sovereign bond markets. When bond yields spike, the cost of borrowing for absolutely everything in your life skyrockets. Mortgages become entirely unaffordable for the average family, freezing the housing market. Corporate debt becomes a crushing weight, leading to mass layoffs. The regional banks, who hold massive amounts of older, lower-yielding government bonds on their balance sheets, suddenly find themselves deeply, hopelessly underwater, reviving the absolute nightmare of the banking crisis we saw flashes of just a few years ago. This is the exact textbook definition of a sovereign debt spiral. To keep the government functioning, to prevent the military from halting, the Federal Reserve will eventually be forced to step in as the absolute buyer of last resort. They will implement yield curve control. They will have to artificially print trillions of new dollars to buy the debt that the rest of the world is violently rejecting. And when you print trillions of unbacked dollars into an economy that is already suffering from severe supply chain shocks, massive defense spending, and skyrocketing energy costs priced by adversaries, you get one mathematically guaranteed result: vicious, unrelenting, structural inflation. You get the total, catastrophic collapse of your purchasing power. This is what a dollar collapse actually looks like. It isn't a dramatic Hollywood movie where the banks suddenly board up their windows overnight and people trade bottle caps in the streets. It is a slow, agonizing, invisible bleed. It is waking up month after month, year after year, and realizing your hard-earned money simply buys less food, less fuel, less security, and less freedom. It is the steady, quiet, ruthless transfer of wealth from the working and middle class to the elite and the sovereign states who hold hard, tangible assets. I want to strip away the complex macroeconomics for a moment. I want to talk directly to you, the person watching this on your phone, sitting in your living room, or listening on your commute. I know exactly how exhausting this is. I know that living through major historical turning points is incredibly heavy on the mind and the soul. You go to work, you sacrifice, you try to save your money, you try to provide a safe haven for your family, and it feels like the very ground beneath your feet is constantly, violently shifting. You look at the shocking prices at the grocery store. You open your utility bills with dread, and you feel a profound, lingering sense of anxiety that you cannot quite articulate. I am here to tell you that you are not crazy. You are not mismanaging your life. You are caught directly in the crossfire of a generational geopolitical transition of power. What we are deeply experiencing in May 2026 is the painful, mathematical unwinding of an empire. The United States has brilliantly exported its inflation to the rest of the world for half a century because of the petrodollar framework. Now, as the BRICS nations build their own unassailable financial walls, as China covertly funds shadow wars to bleed Western resources dry, and as global energy is increasingly priced in renminbi and gold, that inflation is finally coming home to roost in your neighborhood. The human cost of this geopolitical war is not just measured in the tragic, heartbreaking loss of life in the Middle East, though that is a heavy and terrible burden on the collective human soul. The secondary, silent casualties are the working-class citizens across the globe whose livelihoods, savings, and dreams are being sacrificed on the altar of maintaining a dying financial hegemony. We are entering a dark, volatile period the World Bank quietly refers to as unstable stability. The old rules of money, the ones your parents taught you, are entirely gone. The new rules haven't been fully written yet, and in that terrifying, massive gap, chaos thrives and wealth is redistributed. You absolutely cannot rely on the traditional financial advice of the 1990s or the early 2000s anymore. The standard 60-40 portfolio, trusting blindly that the government will step in to protect your purchasing power, believing that the US dollar is an invincible, eternal fortress. These are dangerous, naive fairy tales in 2026. You have to look at what the central banks and sovereign wealth funds are actually doing with their money, not what their politicians are saying on television. China is vehemently hiding its financial support for Iran's war machine, but they are not hiding their ultimate economic strategy from those who know how to read the tape. They are hoarding physical gold at a staggering rate. They are aggressively securing physical commodities and rare earth metals across Africa and South America. They are building robust, independent supply chains that do not rely on the West. They are preparing their entire civilization for a harsh new world where fiat paper currency is treated with extreme, justified suspicion. You must urgently adopt the exact same mindset to protect your family. You must educate yourself deeply on hard assets. You must understand how to protect your labor, your time, and your savings from the silent, insidious theft of monetary debasement and central bank printing. The world is not ending, my friends. I do not want you to leave this video in a state of paralyzing fear. But the world as we knew it, the era of easy money and unquestioned Western dominance, has definitively ended. The grand illusion has been utterly shattered. The silent financial war is now out in the open, raging across supply chains and banking networks, even if the mainstream media cowardly refuses to broadcast it. China's phantom shadow ledger is dictating the pace and scale of global conflict, and the massive, undeniable bill for decades of extreme financial mismanagement is finally coming due. In this new paradigm, ignorance is no longer a defense. It is a massive, fatal liability. Deep, actionable knowledge is the only true asset that cannot be sanctioned, inflated away, or seized by a desperate government. That is exactly why I do what I do. That is why Aurex exists and will continue to fight for the truth. We are going to navigate this incredibly complex, dangerous transition together. We are going to relentlessly track the real data. We are going to follow the hidden money. And we are going to stay one critical step ahead of the false mainstream narrative. Thank you so much for giving me your most valuable asset, your time, today. If this video brought you real value, if it finally opened your eyes to the harsh mathematical reality of the global economy in 2026, please hit that like button right now. Share this video immediately with someone you care about who desperately needs to wake up to what is really happening behind the scenes. Leave a comment down below with your unvarnished thoughts. Are you seeing and feeling the real-time effects of this hidden economic war in your daily life? I promise you, I read every single comment. And remember, please subscribe to the channel. The algorithms that control what you see do not favor this kind of raw, unvarnished, deeply researched truth. Your direct support is the only thing that keeps this channel alive, and I love all of my subscribers for standing by me in the trenches. Stay vigilant, stay deeply educated, and protect yourselves and your families at all costs. John A.G. signing off. I will see you in the next one.